I mean, I've been saying all sorts of crazy things about the Fed. I mean, honestly, I think the hawks. I mean, I'm surprised that Trump hasn't tweeted anything. I mean, send the hawks to prison, going hawk hunting. I don't know. I mean, it's sort of what they've been able to accomplish in terms of pushing the bounds of their view is breathtaking, in my opinion, given the fact that the data is actually going further and further away from them. It's just tempting fate. I just don't like it when they tempt fate. And I think they should not only be cutting in December, but they should be green lighting a few more into 2026.
RenMac Off Script originated as a weekly internal research meeting designed to summarize and discuss what happened in Washington, the markets, and the economic data over the past week. It was always intended to be and remains a free-flowing conversation with no discernible objective other than to extract the wisdom and opinion of our analysts and their expertise. This is a conversation among colleagues. Individual circumstances are unique and nuanced. Do not mistake these conversations for investment advice because it's not. Here we go.
All right. Welcome to RenMac Off Script, where we openly discuss markets, economics, policy, history, and life. It is Friday, November 14th, 2025. I'm Steve Duttenhofer.
I'm Jeff deGraaf.
I'm Neil Dutta.
I'm Steve Pavlick.
And I'm Kellyanne Shaw.
Well, now there's a new voice for the podcast. How about that? DC goes back to work, and we get a DC heavyweight on our podcast. Honored to have you on, Kellyanne. Thanks for joining us.
So Kellyanne, I don't know if anybody told you, but I think we figured out that you're our first female guest. So congratulations and thank you.
Hopefully first of many, but that's exciting.
Well, if you see our demographics, so you can track your demographics, I think our female audience listeners is like 0.00001%. We have more dogs that listen than females that listen. I don't know why. So we're going to change that today with your expertise. Thank you for joining us.
Well, and honestly, Kelly, thank you. It's an honor to have you. You've been part of Washington, D.C. for the better part of 20 years and at the precipice of all the economic and policy and international trade deals and decisions that have happened over 15. So Kelly served as in the White House Deputy Assistant to the President for International Economic Affairs. She served as the Deputy Director for the National Economic Council, served in the Office of International Economic Affairs for both the NSC and the NEC, Trade Counsel to the House Ways and Means Committee, Assistant General Counsel for the United States Trade Representative. She's currently at Aiken Gump. She's got a JD from Columbia, a master's from the London School of Economics. She studied international business law at the University of Paris. She is a University of Washington alum. So welcome to the Big Ten. Go Huskies. And this year, she was named one of the most powerful women in Washington by the Washingtonian. So that is what we have to kick off the Women in RenMac podcast land. I don't know if we can top that again, but appreciate you being on the podcast. Let's start with trade.
I have a question, Kellyanne.
Yeah.
Does that all fit on like one page resume? Can you keep that in the kind of the guideline of everything has to be on one page? I mean, your resume must be 5 pages.
It depends on the font. You can usually play with the margin.
You just have a QR code, right? You just scan the QR code and the whole thing comes out. That's brilliant. Yeah. Awesome.
So let's start with trade. Trade deals were announced last night, I think, right? Does it change the trajectory going forward? Were they meaningful enough to matter for either DC or the markets?
Yeah, well, very exciting night. I think after I sent my 5th email to clients, I had to title it "This is not spam" because there were so many trade announcements. We had, a deal with El Salvador, Ecuador, Guatemala, Argentina, plus the Korea text, which came out. So a lot of this had been anticipated. We were expecting a series of Western Hem deals. But I do think what is interesting about it is the president seems to be giving preferential access to Western Hem textile products. And that is sort of the big headline of these deals over and above what he's given Southeast Asian countries. So I think this is directionally where the president had been going. But the headline for me is all about textiles.
So from your perspective, that's the major shift, right? It's now Western Hem versus others.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can sort of see him working around his geographies. He started with our major trading partners, Japan, the European Union, the UK, China. Then on his Asia swing, he was very focused on the Southeast Asian relationships and getting deals with Asian countries. Now he's focused on West Hem, and I expect a few more to roll out in the next few weeks. And then maybe he'll start pivoting to other regions of the world. But this is about moving supply chains, certain supply chains out of Asia and other parts, and really trying to shore up this Western Hem alliance through economic security as well as trade.
Kellyanne, I have a question for you. Do you think, as a fundamental, like a foundational question, like do you think that bilateral trade deals actually help reduce the U.S. trade deficit?
So it depends what's in the deal. At the end of the day, I think trade gets blamed for a lot and credit for very little. And I think that there are a lot of other economic tools that can more dramatically influence the trade deficit, FX being the primary example. But that said, I do think trade deficits are often a symptom of a broader imbalance in a trading relationship, where, for example, the U.S. has much lower tariff rates than the rest of the world and had for 30 years until the president came in just this year to try to rectify that. An asymmetry in non-tariff barriers, regulatory processes. And so I think trade can help fix that, but you have to do a lot of other stuff too, in addition to these trade deals, to really go after the trade deficit.
Kellyanne, could I ask you just about like the timing? If I remember correctly, I think there was an EO in September that sort of suggested that partnership agreements, those with the U.S. had a partnership, may see some tariffs, be reduced moving forward, and that may have potentially paved the way a little bit for this. But the timing of the announcement comes after the November 4th off-year election. Affordability was obviously a big issue according to the pollsters. We've seen the president propose a number of policies that seems to address that. Is this tariff reduction maybe part of that moving forward?
Yeah, I think that tariff reduction was always part of the plan on some level. And that's because I think everyone in the administration was well aware that they were effectively breaking the entire global trading system back in April and then piecing it back together. And that at some point, there would be overcorrections that would need to be corrected, that some of these tariff rates would need to be recalibrated. We see this a lot with tariff inversions, where sometimes the tariffs on the parts and components you need to manufacture make it so that it is less competitive to manufacture in the US. So there will be some more adjustments we see there. But to your point, I think it's absolutely right that the White House is extremely focused on what happened in the elections. The fact that even if some of the economic data is good, Americans don't feel that. So they need to take steps, including on tariffs right now, to help consumers feel better about the economy, or they're going to lose the midterms. So I think that's part of what's going on here as well.
So let's talk a little bit about that, Neil, how consumers are feeling, what the data is going to look like going forward. This week, the other big news, I think, was there was an adjustment to, the possibility that the Fed's going to ease in December. You had a note out to clients saying probably not going to happen in December and probably not going to happen in January.
Yeah, I mean,
but they don't feel. But the consumer doesn't feel very good.
I've been saying all sorts of crazy things about the Fed. I mean, honestly, I think the hawks. I'm surprised that Trump hasn't tweeted anything. Send the hawks to prison, going hawk hunting. I don't know. It's sort of what they've been able to accomplish in terms of pushing the bounds of their view is breathtaking, in my opinion, given the fact that the data is actually going further and further away from them, right? The most obvious reason for why they've been squawking is around inflation. But what I find interesting is how the narrative around inflation has shifted multiple times over the last year. Talk about goalpost moving. First it was, well, firms are going to raise prices before they even do tariffs. And then it was, well, they're going to draw down all the inventory first and then raise prices. And now the hawks are saying, well, wait till 2026. At some level, the statute of limitations, give it a rest, So I find it shocking. And I also find their reading of the labor market to be, frankly, depraved. The truth is that they want to sort of rationalize away the slowing in the jobs market because of immigration. If it were really about immigration enforcement, then real wages would be rising. Not the case. Companies would be increasing their recruiting intensity because they feel like they need to find workers. Not the case. Job openings continue to come down. consumers, unless you think every single consumer survey is just surveying like undocumented. I mean, consumers are telling you that it's getting more challenging to find work. So this is clearly a demand-driven phenomenon. And, you know, at his October press conference, look, Jerome Powell knew exactly what he was doing. He went well beyond the sort of standard boilerplate around, well, policy's not in a preset course. He went further and he said, December's not a foregone conclusion, far from it. So that was much stronger language for him. And now the hawks are ascendant. You have every single regional Fed president telling you that that's voting this year. They're lining up against a cut. You have people that were formerly, previously thinking that they would be cutting next year, now telling you that they're not interested in doing so. Kashkari's up there right on the list. He came out earlier this week. So I think it makes perfect sense that the markets are trading December as a coin flip. And, you know, the scenarios are basically, they don't go in December, or they go in December and they signal they're not going for a while after that. And, it's either a hawkish hold or a hawkish cut. But the outcome, I think, is on net hawkish. And that's why the markets are doing what they've been doing. But I just think at a more foundational level, like, it's surprising to me how far the hawks have been able to push their argument, even though the data really hasn't gone their way. Like, yes, we have a government shutdown, and yes, the public statistics represent the gold standard in terms of data, compilation and analysis. But do you really need those numbers to tell you like what's going on in the job market? I mean, ADP was weak, Revelio was negative. It's interesting. Powell mentioned initial jobless claims no fewer than 6 times in his last press conference, and he basically talked about how, well, we're not seeing it in claims yet. Let me tell you something. Claims aren't really a leading indicator. They're just an indicator that happens to come out every week. When you have Amazon, Verizon, Target, Applied Materials, I mean, go down the list. They're all laying people off. Like, where do you think claims are going to go? So it's just tempting fate. I just don't like it when they tempt fate. And I think they should not only be cutting in December, but they should be green lighting a few more into 2026. The fact that they're unwilling to go there tells me that they're basically willing to tighten financial conditions, and they think they've achieved risk management, which means they are willing to let the economy fall apart before they go again.
So Jeff, is the market now anticipating a policy mistake? Is that what's happening?
Yeah, I think that is exactly right. I mean, we talked about this, last week about the highs and the lows, right? 52-week highs, right around 14%. 52-week lows were running right around 12%. That might not seem like a big deal, but it's really unusual. Usually those things are very, very skewed. In other words, you'll have a lot of new highs, you'll have very few new lows. So when they were running, neck and neck, it means that there's this bifurcation. And I think that's exactly what the market's telling us. There's a bifurcation, which is, at the time, AI related was doing fairly well, and the real economy was not doing as well. And that's where you're seeing some of the new lows in staples, real estate, some of the discretionary names, et cetera. So I think that was, an early indication of that. More recently, we've seen this improvement in healthcare. Healthcare is an important indication, particularly against tech, because it really is a yin versus yang. When it's kind of risk on, risk off, you tend to have people gravitate towards, particularly growth managers, gravitate towards technology for risk on, and then healthcare for risk off, because there are elements, obviously, of growth and the like in healthcare, and we've seen that. So healthcare's had a really strong move here in the last week and a half. A lot of breakouts in pharma, some of the breakouts taking place in life sciences. Biotech has been leading. That's been going on for weeks and months now. But I do think that you're seeing some of that gravitational pull away from risk on and looking for a home, and the natural place is historically healthcare. So yeah, I think that's a problem. Now, if we go down and look at credit, if we go down and look at say banks and financials, we don't see it as being irreversible at this point. But I think we're walking on a knife's edge, or the Fed's walking on a knife's edge between providing the the necessary liquidity to keep the wheels of commerce turning on the current trajectory, or in fact slipping off. And I think that's going to be really, really critical over the next 3 to 4 weeks. Neil, just a real quick question. I don't even know if you know this, so it might not be a fair question, but what happens to all the data that we haven't been collecting now over the last month and a half? Is it just a white blank on the charts, or do they go back and revise it? What does that look like?
Well, I'll just keep hitting refresh on the BLS.gov's website. Revised news release dates following 2025 lapse in appropriations. BLS will announce revised release dates on this page as they become available. We appreciate your patience while we work to get this information out as soon as possible. So, it takes a little bit of time to get the kind of gears of the statistical agencies moving again. And the September jobs number is already locked and loaded. I thought Kevin Hassett, NEC director, very inartfully said the September number is cooked. But I think what he meant was basically that this number is ready to be released. The October number is a different story because I think there's enough information to release the establishment payroll survey, but there isn't enough to release the household survey. So we won't get an unemployment rate for October, which would, it's unfortunate. But so it's going to take a little bit of time. And going into the shutdown, the main economic data question was how do you reconcile the slowing in employment growth with the very strong measures of GDP, right? So the Atlanta Fed GDP before the shutdown was tracking, north of 3.5%, and total hours worked over the third quarter was, basically going nowhere. So that was the big question a month and a half ago. And as the data comes out, we'll probably get a better understanding for how those two things reconcile.
Kellyanne, you've been in, as I mentioned in the beginning, in DC for a long time. Do you notice anything different? I mean, you were on the Ways and Means Committee. Anything different in the way Congress and the president acts? Like, is it just their relation is just we're so bifurcated now that there's no relation at all?
Well, it certainly depends on the issue area, and I do think that that the two branches of government have evolved significantly over the last 20 years and certainly over the last 8 years between Trump 1 and Trump 2. I think in terms of some of these economic factors, a lot of members are having private conversations with the administration, even if they're not publicly expressing skepticism about tariffs or the impact of some of these policies. So a lot of the conversations, I think, are happening behind the scenes as opposed to being out in public view. But then again, you have this very polarized American society and representatives who are under increasing pressure to get that headline in their media interview and to really be out there either to the far right or to the far left in terms of some of their messaging. So it does sound to the average viewer that I think there's a lot more dissonance between Congress and the administration than I think there is operationally. So it just sort of takes different forms and different permutations, but I do think there is a pretty good working relationship between Congress and the White House.
What's the economic literacy of if you had to letter grade it, of Congress?
It totally depends on the members. I mean, especially on the House side, you have so many members from very different backgrounds. And a lot of folks do come from business.
That's amazingly polite, by the way. Well done.
I spent 10 years as a professional diplomat, so I'm nothing if not polite. But look, I think that, some members are really in the weeds on some of these economic issues. Other members have other issues that really drive them. I do think the one constant is that American voters are going to vote on the economy. And so I do think that it is an area that, a lot of members can take on wholeheartedly, and others, there's a bit of a learning curve.
I mean, my favorite reptile, James Carville, said it well, right? It's the economy, stupid.
You mentioned something that's sort of bipartisan there, and I guess where I'm going with this is I think a strong approach to China is something that we also sort of see shared across the aisle. What, in your opinion, is sort of the difference in the approach to China from Trump 1 to Trump 2? just in terms of maybe more export controls, more attention to artificial intelligence, and sort of how would you sort of size up the recent meeting between Trump and Xi and sort of how to think about that for maybe the upcoming meeting in April and next year?
Yeah, I'm sort of half smiling because in Trump 1, I was one of the negotiators of the phase 1 deal. So spent a lot of time working with the Chinese and sitting across from them at the table. And one thing that was very clear, frankly, from some of the reporting was that the Chinese never quite figured the president out. And I think the same is true in Trump too, right? Like there's sort of like a bunch of different things going on at the same time. What the big difference is, back in 2016, you had 54% of Americans who had a negative or very negative view of China. Today, that number is closer to 83, 84%. So it's the American public that has changed. You also had a Biden administration in the interim that had very hawkish views towards China, going after export controls on chips, advanced technology, sort of the debate taking place in Congress over do we want to de-risk or decouple? Like these are sort of commonplace terms that back in 2016, 2017 was pretty new to the American political lexicon, and certainly to our allies who thought we were crazy and are now a lot more aligned in terms of their thinking about the China challenge. But I think it's too soon to tell what a Trump to China policy is going to look like. We've got this year-long détente, which frankly, I think even surprised some who were going into that meeting in Malaysia and then South Korea as to how that meeting between Trump and Xi was actually going to go and whether we were going to come out better off, more stable, or the relationship was just totally going to explode. Nobody seemed to know. So we clearly have this stability period for 12 months. We'll see how that goes. That takes us through the midterm. And then we could very easily see like a 180-degree turn in terms of this relationship. I don't think anything is set and anything is stable right now.
How easily can all this be undone with the next administration? I mean, is that kind of what we're looking at, that the policy is just going to be a pendulum depending on who's in the White House?
In terms of some of these tariff policies and other things.
Right.
I mean, so anything you do just through executive authority can technically just be unwritten by the next administration. So like the practical implications of doing so are very different than the political implications for doing so, though. And so you saw Biden, who maintained all of Trump's tariffs, sans a few with the European Union and a few other things, and even turned up the pressure on China himself. So I think it will depend on how the president's policies go, how they land, whether a year from now, 2 years from now, Americans feel better off and these policies are working for them, or if they feel like they haven't quite worked for them. And then you might see some reversals in the next administration. So for me, the jury's out as to what this means, but I do think tariffs are going to feature more prominently in the political discourse moving forward, regardless of who's sitting in the Oval.
Well, as you look into 2026, what do you feel like the tripwires are? That I mean, obviously we touched a hot stove in April. Is that stove still hot or hot enough where we're going to go down that path again, or has that been sufficiently bookmarked and said, okay, like that we know where we can't go, and so now let's work our way back from there and go. But what do you see as the tripwires that could upset the apple cart here between now and the end of next year?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's the voters. I get this question a lot of like, what data does the president listen to? Does he watch the markets every day? If the markets crash, is he going to reverse course? I think that was April. That was the bond market. That was a lot of the feedback loop was happening from Wall Street to the White House at that point. The feedback loop that's happening now is what happened last week in terms of the elections and voters and voter confidence in terms of consumer prices. So I think that's what the White House is going to be listening to over the next 12 months as we go into the midterms. And if anything's going to have an impact on the president's policies, it's going to be that. And so that's a little bit different than sort of the traditional, let's see what the S&P 500 is doing, and that will give us a litmus for the president, which I think is an oversimplification of how he takes in the information.
Well, to Neil's point, he should be livid with the Fed right now if he's going to be watching the S&P, because that is that's going to be the hot button there.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll hear about it on True Social, if nowhere else.
But Kellyanne, you mentioned, shifting courses perhaps to the next administration or not. It's very difficult once you get that tariff revenue, right? To then all of a sudden turn your back on it and say, yeah, we'll get away. It's going to help the coffers, right? I mean, so I'm sure that's why every administration, those tariffs are probably here to stay for a long time.
Yeah, the one thing you left off of my very impressive bio is that I also teach at Columbia Law School a course on the history of U.S. trade policy from the beginning of the Republic to present day. And what's so interesting is that if you look historically, debates over tariffs have been the most intense throughout our nation's history. And there was this hearing that took place for over a course of 5 days back in 1934 about giving the president the authority to lower tariffs after World War I. And there were very, very colorful language coming from both sides of the issue. And, it's been a relatively quiet period for the last few decades as most Americans were taught tariffs are bad, free trade is good. I think we are now swinging to the completely opposite direction of really using tariffs for a bunch of different things. And I think that this debate's going to continue regardless of who's in the Oval Office.
Have Democrats ever, in modern times, given up a revenue source? Case closed.
Historically, Democrats were actually the free trade party, and they're the ones who pushed for tariff reductions back in the 30s and 40s and 50s. And it was the Republicans who were pushing for higher tariffs. So, I think things can turn on their head pretty easily. I don't think Democrats know what to believe right now on any of these policies. And frankly, some Republicans don't either. It's really upside down land for both parties.
I would just add something, what Kellyanne is saying with respect to maybe the bipartisan support for tariffs moving forward. In addition to the revenue source, you develop these political constituencies. And if you look at where some of those constituencies are in the presidential battleground states, that will drive a lot of the policy. And I think that's sort of, one thing that you ought to consider there, because a lot of questions get asked, are they likely to come off? And I don't think the answer is that clear, that just because, Trump's doing this, that there's going to be this reflexive, well, you have to undo it. I think the other thing that Democrats traditionally also used to support and had made some inroads, and Trump sort of come in and upset that, is with working class voters and the idea of bolstering manufacturing here in the U.S. So I think there may be some disagreement as to how to best go about it, maybe use some different authorities, but I don't know that they necessarily disagree with the end result. I think Senator Elizabeth Warren was actually making comments recently to that effect.
Yeah, well, in the 30s it was the farmers, right, and now it's the working class, blue collar workers, and all that has shifted. Kellyanne, maybe this is outside your purview, but what do you see in terms of with trade and the backlash in terms of the reserve currency, as the U.S. dollar? Are we at jeopardy of losing that, diminishing the impact? How do you see that, and is that part of the calculus with these negotiations?
Yeah, I mean, we robustly debated this back in Trump 1.0. There was a push by some in the administration to say, look, we can do all the trade deals we want. We can tariff everyone in the world we want, but that's not going to fix the trade deficit. You've got to do something about the dollar as the world's reserve currency. This went to the president. I think there have obviously been conversations since. He's talked about this publicly, even including on the campaign trail, going in early in his term. The president likes a strong dollar. And I think that's likely where we're going to land. And I don't really see a lot of discussion around trying to change the status of the dollar at this point. And so what we're left with are trade tools to try to address some of the same things that arguably you could address through currency. Doesn't look like we're going to go down that path, at least not right now.
All right, let's get to the mailbag. Good morning, Harry. I got a lot of questions again this week to the mailbag. Keep those coming, obviously, on our social media platforms, on X, on LinkedIn, on Twitter. But not Twitter. I guess that's not even a thing anymore. I don't even know.
You're such a boomer. You are such a boomer. It's unbelievable.
I don't know. Just go to the social media stuff. We'll send you a hat if we use your question. There we go. How about that? Harry, take it away.
Okay, today we have the question come from Carter Evans. He is asking, my question is about non-farm payrolls. Is it probable for the U.S. to have zero or negative job growth for 2025? And if so, how much of a political problem will this be for the Republicans, and President Trump in 2026? Thank you.
Neil?
Well, yeah. I mean, is it possible that we get... Yes, it's possible. It's possible because it's already happening, friends, unfortunately. I mean, we have had private jobs growth sluggish. It's basically flat. Given what we know about potential revisions, I mean, it could well be revised downward. And in some cases, it's being engineered to be negative. I mean, a bunch of government workers came off the payroll counts at the end of September because they took the Doge buyout. I mean, that's not going to show up in payrolls in October. So, I mean, when that number is ultimately released. So I would say that it's possible. And, I think my own view on it is if you think that labor market conditions don't matter as much, right? Because inflation is felt by everyone and employment is not felt by as many people. That's a dangerous game. It's a really dangerous game because unemployment by its nature is nonlinear. Inflation, by contrast, is linear. So the risk with unemployment is never that it just goes up a little bit. It's that it goes up a little bit and then it cracks and it goes up a lot. And I mean, it can be very quick where people complain a lot about inflation, and then very quickly they start complaining about employment, and that's ultimately what matters. And I think because you can solve inflation really quickly if more people are unemployed. So I think that's why it's I don't really buy into the idea that it makes sense to kind of overweight inflation, even politically. So that's what I think. I mean, it's just interesting. I mean, you go back to 2008. Obviously, nothing that we're going through right now is anything like that. So I want to be clear. But remember, there was a time in like the middle of 2008 when gas prices were collapsing and consumer confidence was actually strengthening a little bit. And what was Congress doing? They were pushing back on on TARP and these sorts of things. And what happened? Like, you just exacerbated the downward pressure that was already in motion in the labor markets. And the rest is history.
So then to Steve and Kellyanne, then does if we get this negative, payroll, outlook or results, what kind of political problem is that for the Republicans and for Trump?
Well, I guess first I want to give a shout out to Carter Evans. I believe I worked with him at Treasury. I believe it's the same person. I'll yield to Kellyanne here because she actually worked at the White House. But from a political math perspective, I understand what Neil's saying, but I would assume that unemployment matters to a smaller subset of people who are unemployed. I think what you saw at the off years is inflation impacts everybody, and that's in one way negatively. So if I had to choose my options being bad or worse, I would put the layoffs in the bad category and inflation in the worst category. But Kellyanne probably, because she sat there, has a better perspective than I do.
No, I totally agree. And look, it may ebb and flow depending on what administration we're in or period of history. But right now, people care about the cost of just living their life. And I think that inflation is going to matter a lot more in terms of the political consequences than unemployment, unless those numbers get really significant, in which case there's obviously going to be a huge impact there.
Hey, Neil, one of the questions that came in from Derek Stockman about owner's equivalent rent, and just because we're talking about inflation and how these mortgage buy downs may actually, from the home builders, may actually be keeping the owner's equivalent rent at a higher level than otherwise would be if they were just lower in prices. Do you give a lot of credence to that just because it filters in, again, into the inflation outlook?
No, not really. I mean, if anything, the price premium for new homes relative to existing has completely evaporated as they sit on more unsold inventory. So I don't know that that's really having a big effect one way or the other. One thing we do know is that observed rents are going down both for single family and for multifamily units. Like if you look at the latest data from Apartment List, multifamily vacancy rates are at their highest it's at a fresh high, and rents are down about 1% against last year. And these sort of market-based lease measures tend to lead the official statistics. So it points to some renewed downward pressure in rents going forward.
Okay. Well, Carter, we'll get you a hat, especially because you submitted a question that poked fun at Pavlick's Nittany Lions and the epic catch against them last week. But hey, on the good news front, the Eagles flushed the Johnnies. So well done there. We'll get you a hat. And Derek, we'll get you a hat as well. Thanks for submitting those questions. All right, let's go around the horn. What we're watching this week. Neil, what's on your horizon this week?
Well, we have some survey data coming out. So the Empire Manufacturing is going to be released next week. These are November data points, and we get the NAHB housing number. What we're hearing from our sources is that unsold inventory for home builders continues to go up even through October. So even though you've seen some interest rate relief, it hasn't really been enough to kind of clear builder backlogs, that's really it. A bunch of survey data, and we'll be awaiting that scheduling on the other data. But for now, it's just survey pieces of information that are coming out.
Pavs, what are you watching?
Well, I'll bring in Kelly in too. She's probably watching some of the same things. But we're actually reopening the government. So Congress is going to come back for 1 week before they adjourn again for what else? A recess. Your tax dollars not at work. But in the Senate, it looks like they're going to be trying to work through some additional spending bills. We'll see how much progress they make. Even if they make some headway in the Senate, you're still going to have to do this, make some progress there in the House. And then on the House, it's going to be this vote on the Epstein discharge petition. I suspect they probably have enough votes to get it through the House. I don't know that there's a similar forcing function in the Senate, so there'll be some pressure there to see whether or not the Senate does take it up. If it does clear the Senate, I suspect President Trump will veto it, so I don't know that anything's really going to come of that. But at least for next week, that's sort of what's top of mind for me. But I don't know, Kellyanne, or what are you watching?
Yeah, a lot of the same things. I will say the government shutdown did not seem to impact anybody at USTR, who I think were burning the midnight oil and negotiating all these deals. But I, like I have been for the whole year, I'm on Tariff Watch 2025. I think that just before we hopped on, Ambassador Greer announced that the U.S. government would be cutting tariffs more broadly, not just for trading partners whom we have a deal with, but to help Americans at the grocery store. Also watching to see what they do in terms of housing and energy costs, because that's really the vulnerability that the White House has right now, in addition to consumer goods. And then potentially what happens between now and the end of the year with China. They need to buy 15 million metric tons of soybeans and haven't bought a single bean since the meeting between Trump and Xi. And so I'm watching to see if they're able to comply with that.
Just on that, seems like a big number to me. So they agreed to buy them, and they've not won?
They have not. And if you look at the data, they've actually purchased more than what they need for the whole year already. So they're presumably going to buy these soybeans and then just sit on them. Or I don't know how well they store, but they have said they're going to do it. The administration needs to hold them to it. This is one of those binary parts of the deal where they either do it or they don't. And if they don't, I think we see this relationship start to fall apart a bit.
Wow.
It's a lot of edamame.
Jeff, what are you watching?
Look, I think the rubber's meeting the road here, right? Between these defensives and the cyclicals. So that's going to be a continued source of anxiety, and I think we need to watch that. I would say one of the confluences here that we're seeing is a lot of these, really, really speculative names, and I'll just label them. The quantum trade, the quantum computing trade, the rare earth, some of these things that were really parabolic in August and September are just now approaching oversold conditions, and many of them have corrected 30 to 50%. So I mean, those are real legitimate drawdowns that you're seeing, but they're just now entering this oversold territory. In good uptrends, oversold conditions hold, right? So we'll be watching to see if they can actually find some type of footing here which would be good news. But look, we've broken support on Bitcoin. The other cryptos look weaker than Bitcoin has. So that risk off trade has been permeating, for several weeks here. And now it'll be important to see if that focal point on these oversold conditions can actually hold. If they do, that's good news. That means, this is just kind of this correction in the ongoing trend. If they rally and then they fail relatively quickly, that's a problem. And so that's going to really be our focus, not only next week, but really between now and the end of the year.
So we're at a critical juncture for the market, is what you're
Without
telling me.
question.
Got it. Well, Kellyanne, I really appreciate you coming on. I know you've got a lot of things in DC on your agenda, so to fit us in like this is fantastic. You're welcome back anytime on this podcast. So thank you very much for coming.
How many hours of sleep do you get? I mean, it must be impossible with all this happening 24/7. That's terrible.
I'm billing a lot. My law firm is very pleased.
A true answer right there. I'm billing a lot. I love it. Thank you for joining us.
What a great place to stop. Join us next week without Kellyanne, although Kellyanne will be more than welcome any other time, when we'll be 1 week older, 1 week wiser for this podcast. Until then, I'm Steve Duttenhofer.
I'm Jeff deGraaf.
I'm Neil Dutta.
I'm Steve Pavlick.
Oh, and I'm Kellyanne Shaw.
Excellent. Take it to the bank.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.